it with your feet? Yeah, no, he'll move the microphone for you.
Should we move a chair? Let her put her feet on the chair.
Yeah, what about that? That's a good idea. Mom, I think that's going to be painful after a while with your hip.
This is for your feet. I am fine.
Okay. Do you want your sweater or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe let's just try it. Let's try it. Let's try to put the chair in.
Yeah, let's.
I have it.
You're okay? Sure. If not, you can just get up and we'll put it in a regular chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Center for Jewish Life here in Sag Harbor. Some of you have been here before. For those of you who haven't, welcome. We have a very strict door policy over here, and that is we have a metal detector. Only those who have a neshama, which means a soul, a kind heart, is allowed in. Looking around the room over here, I see a lot of people with their neshamas, their souls glowing. It's a Sunday afternoon, peak season here in the Hamptons, and I see all ages who have taken time out of their busy weekend to attend this very important lecture. So we're honored to have Maritza Farkas Shelley, born in 1928 in Hungary. We were honored to have Maritza speak to our community last summer season. And for today, we had invited another young lady by the name of Irene Zisblatt, who lives in Florida, and she was going to fly in to spend some time with her son in New Jersey, which she did. She came in last week. But just on Thursday, her son called me that she's feeling a little bit under the weather, and she was taken to the hospital. Thank God she's doing fine now, and as soon as she stabilized, the first thing she wanted to know if we're on for Sunday, the lecture. Her son told her, please, rest up a little bit, and in a few weeks, if you're feeling better, we can always reschedule. So I didn't know what to do. We had this on the calendar. So I think it was Thursday afternoon. I called Maritza. I said, hey, are you in town? Sure. You available for a quick pep talk? When? Where? I'll be there. So, number one, Irene sends her apologies for not being able to attend, and we're more than grateful for Maritza to be able to be here today.
I am grateful.
Thank you. So, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Maritza Farkas Shelley. And as we hear her firsthand account, firsthand testimony, I think there's so many things that come to mind. But two things that I think one can reflect on, in addition to the rising anti-Semitism and the Holocaust denial that exists, which that's a whole separate discussion. But just as we hear her story, just reflect on the fact that we have a young lady sitting with us over here, Maritza, sharing her story. And when we hear about the victims of the Holocaust, the 6 million or so, it's not just numbers, but it's 6 million times Maritza and her family, those who didn't survive of her family, thank God some did survive, and also her descendants, which I'm very glad to see here sitting with us, her daughter and granddaughter. So it's very easy to sort of refer to it as just a number, but that sort of diminishes the whole episode and the whole tragedy. I think that's something we could reflect on. And another thing we can reflect on, I see we have some younger than the age of 90 in the room over here. Do we have anyone under 20? Raise their hand. Okay. Jared, raise your hand. Do we have anyone under the age of 18? Raise your hand. Under the age of 13? Under the age of 10? Wow. So another thing to reflect on, I think, is that when these youngsters, God willing, will be 70 or 80 years old, they'll be able to say that they met a woman at the age of 96 who shared her first-hand account. And that's how history gets transmitted. That's how the stories get transmitted from generation to generation. So without any further ado, please give your utmost attention to Maritza Farkas Shelley.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi, for the nice introduction. Okay. Is that better? No. This way? Yes?
Is that better?
That's better? Okay.
Let them, they'll turn it up a little bit.
I always have trouble.
Okay, that's better. Wanna
Okay.
try it?
Very good. Well, welcome. I'm very glad you are all here, and I'm grateful to be able to talk to you and tell you my story. I'm going to take you back to 1944, March 19th. That was the day that the Germans occupied Hungary and the beginning of the Holocaust that was started in Hungary. The reason that it took them so long, because the rest of Europe has been already devastated, and close to the 6 million Jews have been dead, was because Hungary fought on the side of the Germans. And Hitler allowed the Hungarian governor to deal with the Hungarian Jews as he wished. Now, he was not a lover of Jews, but he did not want to exterminate them. But then, when he started to look toward, he realized that the war is going to be lost for Hungary and Germany. And he was beginning to look towards the Allies. At that point, Hitler decided that he wanted to get rid of him and occupy Hungary, and which he did. And that was on March 19th, 1944. My sister and I had a very nice childhood, a pleasant childhood until then. In fact, that day we went to a concert. We heard Beethoven's Requiem. And we came out of the concert, things looked very strange. The city of Budapest, which is where I lived, was full of soldiers. And these soldiers were wearing swastikas. They were not Hungarian soldiers, they were German. Hitler had occupied Hungary. And so we went home, not knowing what's going to happen. My parents were home, and my father was on the telephone. And as I found out later, he was very foresighted, and he was trying to acquire papers that were false papers for our whole family, to teenagers and parents, and it said that all the papers said that we were Roman Catholic. And so he managed to buy these papers. Now, I found out later that a Zionist group in Hungary were the ones who made these papers for Jews to use to survive. And so, unfortunately, we did not use them right away. So here we were, the Nazis occupying the city, and immediately the so-called Jewish laws were enacted. That was, we had to wear a yellow star. I kept one of them, and unfortunately I don't have it with me, which star we had to wear over our heart on the left side. And if we went out in the city, we had to wear them. Now, going out to the city was not easy because some of the Jews, some of the laws were very strict about what Jews were allowed to do. We couldn't go outside until the evening. There was a curfew for Jews. And we couldn't shop except in certain stores. All the Jewish stores were discontinued, and any store that Jews owned were taken away right away. So was my father's. And then the deportation started. First, the men from 16 to 63, which included my father, and he was taken first. I still don't know where he was taken. He did survive, but we never talked about it. I assume he was taken to a labor camp. All Jews were taken. And then within months, this was, the occupation was in March. The deportations started during the summer and also in the fall. So first the men, and then in October, the women were taken from 16 to 43. I had just turned 16, so I had to go. My mother, luckily, was 43, so she was able to stay home. But my sister was 3 years older than I, so the two of us we had to leave. We had to gather the next day at a square in Budapest. Now, what do you pack when you are taken away? You don't know what your life is going to be like. It was certainly not going to be a vacation. So my sister and I had our own backpacks, and we took the following. We took another set of clothing, a jacket that did not have the yellow star on it. We took some sugar cubes, some vitamins, and toilet water. Now, you think this is peculiar, but all of it was very useful. Now, so we gathered and we started to walk. The trains were already occupied by taking the village Jews to Auschwitz. So us in Budapest had to walk. And we walked for a whole day, and at night we arrived at a brick factory. Now, oops, where's my water? Sorry.
You comfortable?
Okay. Okay.
You want to hold it?
Yeah, fine. So the factory was closed.
You lost your microphone.
Oh, sorry. I'm hugging. Actually, so the factory, the brick factory that we were taken to, was closed, but the bricks were outside drying. Apparently, that's the process. And they were piled up in about 6 feet tall and 4 feet apart. And that's what our home was. We had to sleep between the brick walls outside. And by then, it was October, it was cold and raining, but that's where we were. Our job was to dig ditches. Every day around 5 o'clock, we had to carry our shovels, which were rather heavy to carry, but if you couldn't carry it, you didn't live. So we did. And went out to where we dug these ditches, because the ditches were meant to stop the approaching Russian troops and tanks to cross into Budapest. And so every morning at 5 o'clock, we had to get up and go out to dig. And we were always hungry. We always talked about food. The only thing we talked about was various dishes. But I tell you, being thirsty was worse than being hungry. Anyway, our food was a piece of bread, dry bread, and a little cup of water. So we were hungry and we were thirsty. And this went on for weeks. But we survived. And then I was separated from my sister because of my age. I was younger, and I was able to connect with my mother, because at that point, all Jews, regardless of age and gender, were to get on to a march to Germany, to a concentration camp. Most likely either in Auschwitz, but most likely there were several concentration camps. And we were not sure which one we will end up in. My mother was determined to find my sister, I was with her, and every night that we stopped, she would go around the camp and ask people whether, okay,
Adjust it. Like that.
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. Anyway, so every we were now in this work camp, and every morning we took our heavy shovels and went out to dig the ditches. And in the evening, when we came back to the camp, we were given that piece of bread. But for some reason, and I still don't have the answer, 16-year-olds were allowed to go back home. There must have been some order by some well-meaning Hungarian that decided, must have had a child who was 16 or younger. So I was able to go home, but my sister, who was 3 years older, wasn't. So when I went home, I had to walk home, of course. My mother was there. There was a bathtub. I could take off my clothes, take a bath, have some food, some drink. I was full of lice, so my mother right away washed my clothing. It was heaven, but it only lasted 2 days. 2 days later, the order came that all Jews, regardless of age or anything, will have to leave. So as I said, my mother and I were together, and she was determined to find my sister. So every night when we stopped, she would go around and ask people. My sister was exceptionally blonde, and my mother would go around describing her to people whether they'd seen her. There were like 50,000 Jews marching towards Germany. And my mother was determined. She knew she would find my sister. And sure enough, one night somebody said, well, I saw someone very blonde, but she's sitting on the grass over there. And sure enough, it was my sister. And she was in terrible shape. She really didn't want to live anymore. Her feet were all in terrible condition, all blistered. She couldn't have walked another day. So my mother tore up some of our clothing and bandaged her feet, and the next day we took her between us, and as we went back on the highway to march, we more or less carried her around and made her want to live by telling her nice stories. But my mother realized that this is not going to last. And before we crossed the German border, my mother decided we had to escape. Now, with the 50,000 Jews on this very busy highway, on the right side of the highway were the Jews marching towards Germany. On the other side of the highway were the Germans and Hungarian troops moving towards Budapest because they knew they will have to fight the Russians. So it was a very busy highway. And our guards were not always with us, sometimes ahead of us, behind us. So there were periods of time that we were unguarded. And so we came to a little bridge over a dried out stream, and my mother decided this was it. And we dragged my sister, and we jumped off the highway and hid under the little bridge, while the troops and the Jews walking above us. So we were hiding there and changed our clothing. We took off our jacket and took the other one without the yellow star, and waited until the Jews marching ended. I went up to the highway and looked to see what was going on, and sure enough, there was nobody on that side of the highway. Of course, the Germans on the other side of the highway were still there. But we had no choice. We had to do something. So we went up onto the highway. We were now normally dressed, no yellow star, and started to walk toward the nearest village. But no sooner did we do that, we came across a Hungarian soldier. And he said to us, well, who are you? What are you doing here? And my mother came up with this marvelous story of how we are running away from the Russians who have occupied our village. And we have some relatives in this village coming up, and they're going to help us. And the soldier said, oh, you have relatives in this village. I am from this village. Who are your relatives? So my mother thought of the most Hungarian, the least Jewish last name, and said, we're looking for the Kocsis family. And the soldier said, which one? The widow or Joseph? So my mother, of course, said, the widow. And the soldier said, well, I'll take you there. And sure enough, we went with the soldier up the little hill. There were some village up there, and took us to a little village house, and he said, this is the Kocsis family house. So, and he left. So here we were at the Kocsis family house. And we knocked on the door, and luckily, the widow, Kocsis, was out with her older children on the potato field. The only person, thank you, the only person home was a little girl. She was about 10 years old. And we told her this story, how we are her relatives from this little other village. And here we are, and there are all these Jews marching there, and we have no papers. We didn't know we needed papers. And this little girl took it all in and said, well, I have my school certificate. Of course, in Hungary at that time, and maybe even now, any document has your religion on it. So she said, you can take my school certificate, because I was close to her age. And she said, you want to go back to Budapest? Well, everybody hitchhikes. And she said, I can help you hitchhike. Let's go back down to the highway, and you can get back that way. And so we did go back to the highway, the other side, where all the German and Hungarians troops were, and waited. And sure enough, there was a German officer hitchhiking, going to Budapest. And the little girl said, "Go ask him, he'll probably help you." So we did. We went over to this German officer, and my mother, in her perfect German, told him that we trying to get back to Budapest, but there are no trains, no buses, we don't know how to do it. So first he looked at us and he said, "How do I know you're not Jewish?" So my mother said, "Jewish? Look at my two blonde children. How could they be Jewish?" Hungarians believed, and I wouldn't be surprised if they still do, that Jews could not be blonde. So here we were with this German officer, and sure enough, he stopped the German officer's bus, and we all got in. And in fact, one of the soldiers got up and gave his seat to my mother. And here we traveled back towards Budapest. But by then it was at night, and there was a curfew, so nobody was out on the streets, no civilians, only soldiers. So what should we do? I mean, we were able to hide in a doorway, but we had no place to go. Well, luckily, we had some friends who were non-Jewish and who were in Budapest, and we knew that we could count on them to help us. So in the middle of the night, we managed to get to their house. Half the times we had to jump into doorways to avoid soldiers or whoever was out then, but we managed. Sometimes it was on our hands and knees, and we had to even cross a bridge over the Danube to get there. But somehow we managed, and we rang the bell of these friends, and they were marvelous. They took us in. It could have cost their life. If you helped the Jews escape, that was death. But they did it. And next day, we were able to send someone to our apartment, which was not far away, to get the papers that my father got for us, which we didn't use until then. Now we were a family with Roman Catholic, with different names. There were two teenage daughters, which we were, and the parents. So with these papers, we were able to find a place, a little so-called pension. It's a little hotel. And we were able to stay there. And luckily, we had the papers, and they believed us that we were Roman Catholic. So here we were, pretty much safe for the moment. There were maybe 30 or 40 people, because there are a lot of people who left the villages to avoid the fight and came to Budapest. They had no place to go but to these little hotels, so it was pretty full. And but we were able to get a room, and the first couple of days we even had food. The hotel served some food, but then they ran out of food, and we had to go and try to shop for ourselves. There was not much food in Budapest at that point anyway, but we somehow managed to survive on the little that we had. And then the siege of Budapest began. The Russians were bombing the city to get the Germans out. And the bombs were like a 9-to-5 job. They started in the morning and it went on till the afternoon. So we all had to go down to the cellar, everybody in the city. The city heated with coal, so everybody had a coal stove in their apartment and a coal cellar in the building where they kept the coal to heat the apartments. So when the bombing started, the safe place to be was to go down to the coal cellar, because that was underground. And until the evening, when the bombing stopped, when we were able to go outside to find some food or something. By then, of course, the city was totally destroyed. The bombing destroyed the city. The streets were full of dead people, dead horses. Actually, we did eat those horses. And one day, my father appeared. He was able to escape from where they took him and managed to find us, because the people that we went to when we escaped we knew that my father would, if he survived, would go to them because they would know where we are. So there we are. All four of us survived, and we were in this coal cellar. And one day, the door to the cellar opened, and there stood a Russian soldier, and we knew that we survived. Although life was not easy afterwards, but nobody was going to try to kill us because we were Jews. And so that's basically my story. And I'd love to hear your questions.
We'll take some questions. Go ahead, maybe stand up and
Sure.
say it out loud so
You said
everybody
your
can-
father had a store. What kind of store did your father have?
Textile.
Textile?
Factory. It's a factory.
Well, he had
And
a
a
store and
Go ahead.
How much time elapsed till you were all reunited? From March 19th, you were reunited when? Approximately.
yeah, it was maybe in December at that point that we were all together.
You mentioned before the German occupation of Hungary that life was not easy. You know, it was different. But what was life like prior to the Hungarian?
Well, of course, anti-Semitism was always somewhat around in Hungary, but we still had a pretty good life. I had a really very nice childhood. My father made a good living, and so life was not bad. But yeah.
Yeah, so like a follow-up, like when Hungary started fighting with Hitler, and you said the governor could do their own handling of the Jewish situation, you know, in Hungary. What did he do?
Well, he wasn't really allowed to do what he wanted to do because he needed the Jews, and in Hungary they were very helpful to him. And but the Hungarian fascist government that took over replaced him, and he was actually, his name was Admiral Horthy, and he was an admiral even though we had no ocean. It was a totally landlocked country, but he was dressed like an admiral too. But he was replaced by the Hungarian fascist government, and life changed very quickly.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm from Scotland.
Yeah.
Did you have cousins or school friends who, like, what happened to other people? Do you know people that actually survived, or did you manage to find people afterwards? Like, how did your circle do?
Yeah.
Your Jewish circle?
Yeah, well, mostly the male members of my family had not survived because they were taken to camps, concentration camps, and very few people came back from those camps. As you know, 6 million Jews were killed, and about 800 Jews, Hungarian Jews, were killed. There were only 200.
What about your school friends?
Oh, my school friends, some of them survived, but I went back to school after the war. I still had a couple of years in high school, or what was called the gymnasium, before I could enter the university. And it was very strange after what we survived to go back to a sort of normal life. And I met, I would say, half of my school friends survived in various ways, but I couldn't stay in school. First of all, my father died, and I had to get a job, and also to conjugate Latin verbs or high mathematics that we were supposed to do. It just didn't make any sense to me anymore. So I stopped going to school. I finished in this country.
Did you learn to speak English here or over there?
No,
You
actually,
speak beautifully.
we spoke English in Hungary.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, Hungarian is not a very useful language. So my parents insisted on us learning German and English and French, and I even studied Swedish because I loved the sound of it. So we had.
We'll take some questions from the back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Budapest was occupied in 1944. This was already years into the war. How much were you aware of what was happening in Germany during the war?
We did not even know about Auschwitz at the time, because there were we had no newspapers, no. One thing that happened as soon as the Nazi government took over in Hungary, all Jews had to turn in their radios. And so we should get no news of them losing the war, actually. So we had very little information as to what was going on.
Jerry?
After the war, you were in Hungary, and the Russians basically controlled, either directly or indirectly, Hungary. So how did you guys get out?
You mean?
How'd you get to the US?
Yeah, I know. I had some relatives in this country, and with their help, it was not impossible to leave Hungary if you had the right kind of papers.
You came alone.
Hmm?
You tell people you came alone when you were 19.
Yeah, I did come along.
Question?
I was born in Hungary in September 1941 to German family. And the war to my village, Bakanejako, came in November 1944. I was 3 years old and we had a farm. And I remember the Germans came through first. And every able-bodied man, you went along or you were shot. My father was 42 years old. He had 3 children and a wife. So he went along with the Germans. And that's the last thing I remember, him sitting in the lorry. He was the third man on the left. But anyhow, I really wanted to hear. And I married a Jewish person. And I remember I asked my mom over and over again, what did you know about the Holocaust? I came from a village, people went, you went to school until you learned the catechism by heart. And if you had a farm, if they needed you on the farm, you didn't go to school. So very different from your story in Budapest. Anyhow, my mom said, one day, we didn't have a newspaper, we had no electricity, no running water. We had a town crier who came through our village every night at 8 o'clock. You went out on the street and somebody would read to you what the government wanted you to know. And they were told, as of today, you're no more to shop in the Jewish stores. We had 2 stores where you bought food. I mean, we didn't buy food, we produced everything ourselves. You would buy sugar, you would buy salt and whatever, but they were told not to go anymore shopping in the Jewish stores. And you were told on the penalty of being shot. I mean, like to have, simply not to talk about it, it had to be quiet. So I'm trying to tell the other side, it's easy to say, and I condemn, of course, I'm not what the Germans did, but if it's your life, and you're also very careful, you think about yourself too. Okay, anyhow, thank you.
Okay, so, go ahead, yeah.
When you came back before your father died, was he able to reclaim his business and were you able to reclaim your apartment and property?
It's a good question. Actually, we didn't really do that because it was just survival in any possible way that we managed. And trying to go back to business when my father was not there anymore, just didn't do it, and we couldn't do it.
But you did go back to your apartment, but then you had to have Russians living there with you.
Yeah. Well,
good
They
question.
actually, they were rather nice. They, a lot of people think that's terrible, but they were an occupying army. They came to the city. They were so homesick. They're always singing these songs of going home, being home. But they needed some place to live, so they occupied some of the apartments. And so one room in our apartment was occupied by this Russian, I think he was an officer of some kind. But he brought us some food and he helped us in some ways. So I can't really complain about them. Of course, they made the city made the city cleaned up by anybody. If they saw someone on the street and there seemed to be some dead people around, they ordered whoever it was on the street to carry the bodies. So people didn't love them, for sure. But
Eva?
I'm the daughter of a Hungarian Auschwitz survivor, well, two survivors. And I want to ask you two questions. Over the years, did you go back to Hungary? Because people are always surprised that my parents returned to Hungary. They had good relationships with their non-Jewish neighbors. In fact, I have my grandmother's engagement ring because neighbors returned these things to my parents. They escaped when communism took a foothold in 1949, but if that had not happened, they probably would not have left. Would you have stayed? Did you go back over the years? And my second question is, what wisdom could you impart on us during these times? You know, sometimes people say to me, "Oh, Aviva, you're so outspoken, tone it down." It's dangerous times. What do you think?
well, I am concerned about anti-Semitism. I think it's in the air, and we have to fight it. What?
Have you gone back home to visit?
Yes, I did. I did go home because my mother and my sister were there. And it was, they were in good shape. I mean, my sister was a dancer, even though she messed up they messed up her feet. She was able to become a dancer, and she was quite prominent, and she also taught dancing, sort of a mixture of modern dance and ballet. And my mother also got a job. They moved back to our old apartment, and life went on. So I did go back. I wouldn't go back now because I don't like Orban, who is the Hungarian governor or top guy. So
We'll take another 2 or 3 questions and, okay, yes.
What did the non-Jewish population of Hungary think of Nazi Germany?
Say it a little louder, stand up.
you
What did
repeat.
the non-Jewish population think of Nazi Germany?
Well, in Hungary,
Yeah.
unfortunately, many of the Hungarian non-Jews joined the Nazi Party. I can't say they not all did, but enough so that the Jews had no chance in Hungary.
Another question? Yeah.
Two quick questions. One, what year did you come here to the United States? Two, did you
you go to look for the family that saved your family, the friends, neighbors?
Hmm.
Were you in touch with them?
Okay. I came here in 1948, and the family that helped us immigrated to Australia, unfortunately, because I really would have liked to keep up. And by now, I'm sure they were quite a bit older than I. By the way, to do the math for you, I'm 96.
You're terrific.
We'll take one more question.
When you were on the road with your mother and sister, when you jumped off the highway to get away, were you afraid?
That's a very interesting question, and it is always asked when I talk to young people. And the answer is, the moment I decided to escape, I was not afraid. Up until then, I was, because our life was always in danger. But at that point, I was doing something for myself. I'm saving myself. Yes, so I wasn't afraid. And I tell this to young people, and I tell them to remember that if you're doing the right thing, you won't be afraid.
Thank
Yeah, another thing I would like to say to young people, unfortunately, you're not school-age kids, but I made a terrible mistake by not having, when I went to school, which was mixed religions, I never had a non-Jewish friend, and that was a terrible mistake.
Why?
Because the Nazi propaganda was that Jews were an inferior race. Now, if I had a non-Jewish friend and we did things together, we liked each other, we slept in each other's houses, it wouldn't have happened. Nobody would believe it. Because my friend is Jew, and I love her.
It would have happened.
Yes.
It would have happened. I know many cases where it happened.
Yeah.
Feels like it could happen here now.
Well, that's why I always suggest to young people, be open to other religions and other countries, other nations, other customs. It's very important.
Thank you very much, Maritza. Listening to the story, I think for a moment, if we could just appreciate the rarity of her survival. And out of the 50,000 people on that death march, probably maybe 1% survived, if not less. And as the verse in Zechariah says, it's Ud Mutzal Me'ish, which is loosely translates as one single spark saved from an entire bonfire, entire inferno, or one grain of sand saved from the entire, beaches here on the East End. European Jewry was 6 million times the story and the beautiful life of Maritza. And the fact that she is here today is nothing short of miracles upon miracles upon miracles that were set in motion for that to happen.
And
So,
the will to live. Yeah, will to live.
will to live. So thank you all for joining. There's a lot to digest in this talk. I also would like to invite you to many of the other wonderful programs we have next Shabbat, Friday night, July 12th. We're having the Sharabi brothers, who survived the Nova Festival. Not only survived, but saved about 2 dozen wounded Israeli partygoers with them at the tank that they were hiding behind. So that's July 12th and 13th, Friday night, as well as Saturday morning. July 21st, we're having the president of Shura Tadin, the Israel Law Center, which fights hate and anti-Semitism around the world. So make sure you're on our email list. Today, there's actually a rally in East Hampton, starting at 2 o'clock with a walk from the windmill, and then 3 o'clock, there's the actual rally at Herrick Park, rally in solidarity with Israel. I encourage everybody to join and notify your friends and family and be there today at 3 o'clock at Herrick Park. Thank you all, and thank you, Maritza.